Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 2, we're on page 1194. Yesterday, we learned about what Eish Shchera is. Eish Shchera means the dark flame, or the darkened flame, which is going back to the beginning of the subject where he began to explain the story of Eliyahu Hanavi, which is when he repaired, it says the Loshen Vayirape, Es Mizbeach Hashem Ahorus, and he healed the broken or the destroyed altar of God, Mizbeach Hashem, the word Hashem, after it was defiled and desecrated. And as he brought from the Yalkut, just go back to the beginning of the context here, on page 1192, the Yalkut and the Medrash, Sheripa Esam, that Eliyahu healed them and brought them derech ra, from a bad path to a good path. The derech ra, the derech teva, aydesh osalam nisim, through performing miracles for them, and kivish shiro came since they witnessed these miracles. Amru, that's when they said Havayahu Elikim. That's what they said. They said Havayahu Elikim twice. So Rabbi Rashab is explaining this healing, what was broken and what was being healed. So to explain it, he spoke about the Mizbeach, the Eish on the Mizbeach, the flame on the Mizbeach is the passion and the Tzimoin, the yearning of Malchus. Eish Hey, Isha, yearning to connect to Eshud, Ish. So after a long explanation and so he said, this is the level of the darkened flame, Eish Chera, reaching toward the higher flame of the white flame. So he began to explain what is darkened flame by saying, what is darkness? That Shchera, Tzimtzum, and concealment precedes illumination and revelation. That was the long discussion about the Tzimtzum and the Eris and the Kalim. So now he's came back on page 1192 and said, after explaining that first comes the Tzimtzum and then comes the Kav. First come the Kalim, then come the Eris. First come the Oisius, when we're talking from the bottom up. And then come the ideas that are conveyed through those letters. So he's talking both on a microcosm in Malchus, which is the kalim of the Isis of Dibur, of speech, in contrast to the kalim of Zah, which is the letters of thought, or on a more macrocosmic level, the Tzimtzum and the Kav, or the Tzimtzum and Rishimu and the Kav, as we discussed, the root of the containers and the root of the energy, the root of the body and the root of the soul. So that's when he went back. What we learned yesterday was that Malchus is called Isha, Eish Hey, Bihi bottom. What's the Hey? The Hey is referring to the root and the beginning of all the letters of the Asarim Amaris, Klolos Elvo Shemokara Asius. So the Hey is referring to the letters of speech that we said are the Kalim, are the containers of Malchus. So that is Eish Shchera, because on one hand it is indeed something is radiating, it is an Eish, it is a flame, but it's a flame that follows follows and flows through the concealment, the kelim. Since it's a light that radiates the darkness, that's the purpose of this light. These letters that come to create are radiating the darkness of the concealment in the containers. So the Oyer is Aydesha Mislabish and Misalim by Asius. The Oyer manifests through manifesting and concealment through and channeling through the letters. Okay, so it is some form of revelation, like he said in the parentheses, but it's still in a state of concealed state. And through this concealment, that's how it radiates the darkness. In other words, it doesn't come from outside as a separate force. It's channeled through the concealments of the Tzimtzum and so on. Okay. And the same thing in the macrocosm. The klolus of b'chinas eira kav, that the kav comes after reisha chashecha, after a darkened state, the tzimtzum, the concealment. Its general purpose is to radiate into existence. It's mamala kalaman, as he said, it's the immanent energy that travels into and permeates and creates and energizes the structure of existence itself. Okay, like a soul inside of a body. And that happens through the tzimtzum, through the cheshach, tzimtzum v'yisalm is b'teich hakelim. So therefore, the kav, same idea, as we spoke on the on Malchus level, the kelim of Malchus, the same idea that the kav follows the tzimtzum, but also is directed by the tzimtzum, by those letters of the Rishimu, like we had discussed, that is through that the kav radiates and draws its energy into creating the structure of existence. So that is all Eish Shcheda. That's the dark flame. How does that begin? Eish Shcheda. That's where we stopped. So we understand what the darkened flame is. It's a flame that's subject to and travels through the darkness or the concealment. So darkness here translated as concealment, the concealments of the tzimtzum, the diminishing and so on. Now, what about Eish Levena? Eish Levana, as was corrected. What is white flame? Since we spoke about Eish Hahei, what about Eish Shiur, the Ish? What's white flame? So he says, so I'm going to start here in line. The line begins HaCheshech, in the middle of the page, 1194. Aleph Kuf Tzadik Dalet. And this is also, if you want to find the text, go to ayinbeis.com. Okay. So now he says, however, the white flame, if you recall, we learned back, I referred to pages long back ago, that the white flame and the darkened flame are in the physical sense, that's the flame that's closest to the wick, because it's already relating to the wick, to existence. And there's the flame as it's more distant from the wick, so it's lighter and brighter. She says, the white flame, or the white fire, you can also say, I'm using the word flame, you could say fire, because ner can be flame and esh is fire. Either way, either dark fire and white fire, or flame. Maybe fire is even better. He says, this air is completely above cheshech, any form of darkness and concealment. So we see now he's already bringing in now the energy, the divine energy that is, as we'll soon learn, the bligvul energy. That's not subject and not flows through the tzimtzum. And we'll learn about exactly what impact the tzimtzum has on it shortly. So he says, "U'kamei ziv hashemesh, kamei ziv hashemesh hu ameres hacheshech." For example, let's look at the sun. So what radiates and illuminates the darkness on earth? When the sun rises, the sun appears, the sunlight, the reflection of the sun radiates and illuminates and makes daylight. That's what means the breaking of the dawn, and the sunlight is shining on earth. Like it says in the pasuk in Bereshis, Vayitan Eisem Elikim, God created the two luminaries, and He placed them. Vayitan Eisem Elikim, God placed them, the luminaries. Lahoyer ala aretz. It says clearly in the pasuk, why was the sun and the moon? But we're talking about the sun here. Why were they created? Not just to be, but with a purpose, to illuminate Esra'od is the earth, as we see. Take away the sun, and everything would be shrouded in darkness, like it is in space. So the sun light is what radiates and illuminates the darkness of the earth, of earth. Because that's the inyan of sunlight, is to radiate, illuminate the world. So he's using this to explain both levels of dark fire and light fire, white fire. We'll see in a moment. Let's continue. But now, how does the sun radiate? How does it illuminate? It doesn't just go from the sun to earth. There's a filter. There's a sheath, what we call the nartik, or the mogin and nartik. Mogin means a shield. Nartik means like a sheath, like a type of a film, a membrane, in which the sun, like we say, hamoitzi shamesh min arteka. It says in the future, when Mashiach comes, God will take out the sun from its sheath. Now remember, we're talking about a transparent shell. Think of it like a transparent. 1 minute. Think of it like a transparent piece of glass or plastic over any object. So it shines through. It doesn't block it, but it weakens it somewhat. It dilutes some of its intensity. So he says that the sunlight shines that conceals, that covers and conceals. Obviously, it does not mean total cover and conceal. Then we wouldn't have sunlight, and we wouldn't have day. But it means if the sun was shining without this nartik, it would burn up existence. That's what it says, because it was too intense. So in a sense, it's like a filter or a film.
Like the ozone layer.
What?
Like the ozone layer.
Okay. But this is the nartik around the sun. Even in science today, the sun, they say, is inside of around the sun, it is like covered with some type of like membrane. Okay. V'hu ma shekosev, and this is what it says, ki shemesh hamogen Hashem Elokim. So the pasuk says, the sun and mogen and its shield, mogen is nartik, it's another name for nartik, is Hashem and Elokim. The two names, Havaya and Elokim, that we've been discussing. That Havaya is the Shemesh, the Mogen Elokim is the name of God that is somewhat conceals the light of the sun. So I should mention, it looks to me, this Ziva Shemesh, at first I read it as if it was a flow from the white flame. I think Kamei Ziva Shemesh is referring to both levels of flame. That's my assumption right now. But let's see. I don't want to conclude that and say anything conclusive until we finish the point. Now he's going to compare. Remember earlier we learned about the difference between the kelim of Zah and the kelim of Malchus. So he said that the kelim of Zah, he compared to the colors of light, or the color of, let's say, the apple, which is a keli, but it's a keli that reveals. So it fits more to the letters of thought that are connected to and a revelation of the ideas that are being conveyed. So he's now going back to compare it with the sunlight. He says, like it says elsewhere, hefresh ben era shemesh lemara v'geven hatapuach. Difference between the light of the sun and to the color and the tint, if you wish, look and color of the apple that we mentioned before. She'ena lifil dover. And when it comes to the color of, let's say, an apple or any color, a color does not have any function. It just reveals what type of object it is. In this case, a red apple or yellow apple, the colors reveal some of the personality of the thing that has that color. Mashenkin Eira Shemesh, what is explained elsewhere, the light of the sun, like you just said, sunlight is not just to give us a picture of what the sun is like. It's not just a color of the sun. Its actual role is to do something. It has a function. And the function is to lifel, to function, and lahoyer, and to illuminate the darkness. Now, why does he bring this here? Not sure. Maybe we'll understand it shortly. Maybe first I was thinking that the kalim of Zah is like the sun, like Havaya, and the kalim of Malchus is like the Mogen, Elikim, the sheath. But that wouldn't fit here because here he says the colors are actually more like Zah, and the sunlight has an impact. So I'm not sure why he brings it here. There must be some connection to the whole topic. So just bear with me right now. We'll get back to it. After we finish the subject, it may be easier to understand. Why is he comparing sunlight to the colors? Just to say that the sunlight has a function? In other words, the colors are like very, very subtle kalim. And also he brings it after Shemesh Mogen. He doesn't bring it after the words L'hoyer Sa'elam. In other words, maybe because the sunlight is subject to the Mogen, to the concealment, whereas the colors are not subject to concealment. I mean, they're kalim, but they are more revealing. Not positive why he's bringing it here. I have a few speculations, but I'd rather wait to see the whole flow here, then I'll go back to it, okay? Okay. Mashenkin Moyer Hashemesh. So that we talked about is the Ziv Hashemesh. So what have we established? The Ziv Hashemesh is the reflection of the sun, means the sunlight, not the sun itself. The sun is the sunlight that radiates. And how does it radiate? Through the nartik. In other words, the sunlight comes after some layer of concealment. Mashenkin Moyer Hashemesh, this Moyer Hashemesh, the very body of the sun, the luminary called the sun, hu lamayla mebchinas hamadrega. We're talking about the Shemesh as it is before it goes through Elikim and the Mogen. It's higher than this level because the sun is in its full intensity. It's not subject to concealment. It's only as the light emerges from the sun, that's where it goes through this layer. But the sun as it is inside the layer, meaning before it shines through that membrane, that Mogen, Nartik, it's there in a way that's beyond and above any concealment, which what he called before was the white flame. So basically what he's, because it comes after some form of Elikim, Mogen and Nartik, some sheath, some membrane, some filter. And the sun itself is like the white flame because it's not subject, it's not affected by that concealment because the sun remains in its full intensity, in its own being. That's what he said right now. Let me see if that helps us understand the parentheses. Well, I'll say this about the parentheses. I will say one more thing that seems to be obvious, but I think there's even more to it, but let's see. The fact that sunlight, if the light of the sun would be like the color of the apple, which doesn't have a function, then you can't say it's a dark flame. Why? Because it's not affected by it. All it is expressing what type of personality this is. It would be like saying the color of the sun is yellowish white, for instance. That yellowish white is not necessarily a dark flame. But to say that the sun, once you say that the purpose of sunlight is to radiate the darkness, that means it has to go down a level to be able to reach and illuminate the dark. That means it's going through this filter, the Nartik and the Mogen. So perhaps that's one point he wants to make, to demonstrate that you can have something that is reflective of the source. It's not the source, that's colors, but that you can't yet call darkened. It's not darkened by the recipient. It's not darkened as a result of it shining to the recipient. Whereas here, you could call it something like that. It's affected by the helam, because it has to radiate and illuminate the earth. The colors don't have any function like that at all. That is the most obvious thing that he's coming to qualify. But the question is, why does he need to say it? Why do we need to know about the colors? Seems to me that the colors are like an even higher level of like almost like the kelim that are higher than the cheshech. I don't know, not sure yet. Okay, that's what I wanted to just add. Fine. So after now he's going to apply this white, the dark fire and the white fire. And he gave the example of the sun, light, and the sun. One is affected by and influences the dark, affected by the concealment and radiates, illuminates the dark. One is the sun itself is beyond. So now he's going to say, V'chein l'mayla. And so too is it above. V'chein, and that's how it is above. What is that? V'chein l'mayla, what level is this l'mayla? This level of the sun itself, or the level of light that's above darkness, not level of light that travels through the tzimtzum, the kav, that travels through the tzimtzum, and its illumination is through the hisalmas, through the letters, through the kelim, through the concealment. So he says, Sevev is not that way. Eira Sevev, remember, he said the kav is mamala kalam. That's the light that enters into each piece of existence and radiates and energizes it's commensurate to every part of the structure of existence. Because Eira Sevev, its role was never about illuminating and creating the worlds. Sevev always remained removed. When we talked about the two levels, the two tracks of energy, there's energy that is lahayras elemis. His purpose is to create, to radiate, to illuminate the worlds. Sevev is above that. So what is the role of Sevev? If you remember, Ki'im, Pchinas, Gili Ha'atzmus. The Er HaSevev, which is the Er HaBligvul, which is soon going to use these words, but the Er HaBligvul is, what is its role? Is to reflect and express Atzmus, to give us a taste of Atzmus. Its role is to express the source, not the recipient, but reflecting the source. The Eina Misalim, b'bchinas cheshech v'helam tzimtzum. And the Er HaSevev does not get concealed within the concealment or the darkness and the covering and the concealment of the tzimtzum. So there we have now two energies. These two energies, the Er HaSevev and the Er Mamala, the transcendent energy and the immanent energy, or in the words we used earlier, the infinite Er, the Er HaBligvul, like we learned earlier, which he said, what was its quality? That it reflects the Ein Sof of Atzmus. We're talking about Atzmus, not Atzmus that's beyond any definition, but that magnitude, that multitude, that ability to just extend endlessly, that infinite power. So that is like the white flame. And the flame and the Ur that connects to existence and relates to existence is like the dark flame. But now he's going to ask a question, which I'm sure some of you may be thinking of. Didn't we learn that the Tzimtzum has two impacts? One on the Er HaBligvul, on Er HaSevev, and one on Er HaGvul. Not just on Er HaGvul, also on Er HaBligvul. Remember, the whole point was, if you recall the two impacts of the Tzimtzum on page 1190, which really was just a summary of what we learned a lot earlier in the Maimer Vayhi Ha'anon. He said clearly, the first impact of the Tzimtzum is to conceal the infinite light, because as long as it's shining, it's alekuz b'pshitis and elam is b'schachus. If the infinite light shines, the Sevev shines without any blot, without any boundary, there's no room for existence. So what are you saying here that is beyond its Tzimtzum? So now he's going to explain really what that means. Basically, he's going to say, and I'll say it first and then we'll read it inside, that the Tzimtzum does not impact Eir HaSeviv. It causes it to recede. The Eir HaSeviv just goes back to its so-called natural place. So it's not affecting this Cholol Mokampone, the space that it creates. But it doesn't diminish the Eir HaSeviv. Eir HaSeviv is just not now revealed. That's what the Tzimtzum does. But it doesn't have a direct impact. It doesn't darken the infinite light. What it does is, it doesn't allow the infinite light to shine. But the infinite light just remains in its source, like in a receded state. So when the teacher, for example, conceals his infinite wisdom, his brilliance, it's concealed only from the student. There's no darkness inside the teacher. In the light that the teacher is going to transmit to the student, there is the Tzimtzum's impact, and the Rishima's impact is to make sure that that stream of consciousness is measured according to the needs of the student. But the Bligvul is either there or it's not there. What I mean by they're not there, it's not diminished, it's not weakened, it's just not present. But within the teacher, it's there, like the sun. The sunlight that comes after the sheath of the Mogil, the Nartik, the filter, that is absolutely subject to the diminishment. But the sun itself, all the sun is with behind the curtain, so to speak, behind the sheath, the sun is in its full glory. That's what he's going to say. So you can't call it a dark light or a dark flame or dark fire. You call it a white fire. So he's going to say like this. And even though that through the Tzimtzum, this Eir HaSeviv, this transcendent energy that is not subject to the darkness of the Tzimtzum, was nistalik v'nesalim, the Tzimtzum, through the Tzimtzum, this energy was removed, you can say receded, and was concealed from the recipients, meaning from the space where the Tzimtzum created the space, the Chol L'Mokaponim, the whole and the empty space. And now he's bringing from a Maimer Vayikra, also a while back, a long while back. And it was explained earlier in the Maimer Vayikra, Ayin Hey. So what did he explain? What does it mean, this concealment? It's the Eir itself, the infinite light, is not being affected directly. It's only not being allowed to shine into this area. So he explained there, one of the explanations for this in Vayikra, there's different ways Chassidus explains this, but the explanation he gave in Vayikra was that now this infinite or save of energy has become something more in potential than in actual. In other words, before the Tzimtzum, the Eir HaBligvul was in full action. It dominated everything. It consumed everything. It was basically divine, infinite divine consciousness, where there's no room for anything else. As we learned earlier, there's nothing but godliness, godly energy. Now, once the Tzimtzum takes place, what happens to this energy? To say it's eliminated, you can't say, God forbid. To say it's diminished and it's within and it flows after the Tzimtzum in a diminished state, you also can't say, because the Tzimtzum didn't impact it. All you can say is that it recedes back. So in Vayikra, the Maimer Vayikra explains, what does back mean? It means it went back into a potential instead of an actual. What is actually now in a functioning? What's functioning now is the Tzimtzum, is the concealment, and the Rishimu that remains, which is those letters, those quiet letters, silent letters, and then the Kav is an action as well. The Kav will then come into existence. So if you talk about this space where existence takes place, what's active right now? The Bligvul is not active. It's only in a potential state. Now you could say, one second, is potential in context of the student or the space of existence? Is it potential also in context of the divine consciousness before the Tzimtzum? That's a good question. I'm asking my question on myself here. But for all practical purposes, to answer that, I'd rather read more. But for sure is the fact that Bligvul is now potentially, it's always capable to return into the Tzimtzum. And the best proof is the whole Aveda that we're talking about is to bring pre-Tzimtzum energy into post-Tzimtzum reality through Aveda. So in other words, it's potentially there. But in actuality, what is the dominant forces that are creating existence is Asara Mamoris Nivra Elam. To put it in more balabatish and practical terms, if God's infinite energy was consciously revealed, in a sense, you couldn't even say Yehi Oyer, Yehi Rakia. The very words to be able to speak the Asara Mamoris Nivra Elam is only possible if that some of that divine infinity or the divine infinity recedes into a potential state. If a teacher, even a human teacher, was allowed his mind to be flowing without filters at all, and the bleak wool of his intelligence would just be shining, he wouldn't be able to even express words. I mentioned a few days ago an example. Sometimes you see someone, you ask a question by a genius, and they're so immersed in the idea, they can't even speak clearly. They stutter or they don't say words. Because to say words requires some form of quieting down that infinite and conscious energy. So to say that by God, obviously, when we say Lamaila Koyach and not Poyel, we don't mean it as a limitation. It just means it's not being activated right now in the process of creation. But to say it's completely not there, you can't say, you say it's there in a potential state. Before the Tzimtzum, the Eir HaBligvul was B'Poyel, and the Eir HaGvul was B'Koyach, was potential. Like we said before, that God envisioned existence, but the envisioning is still a potential state only within the infinite possibilities and the infinity of divine consciousness. The Tzimtzum reversed the process. What became actual became the finite state, the Tzimtzum and then the Kav. And what's potential now is the infinite state of the Eir HaSevav. That's what he said in Maimer Vayikra. So bottom line is, it seems from this that there is an effect of the Tzimtzum on the Eir HaBligvul. So you said you can't, you're saying it's Ma'ila Mecheshach. He's going to explain, but he just wanted to bring in a little more explanation of what exactly the Tzimtzum accomplishes here. I can elaborate more, but the Maimer Vayikra, and I'll tell you what page it's on if you want to look it up. I mean, you could just look at yourself, but this is discussed in the Maimer Vayikra begins on page 910. I'm sorry, 8. No, 910. Yeah. Tov Kuf Yud. But the actual place where he talks about this point, he said the Koyach B'Poyel, I think it's page 915, if I'm correct. Maybe even earlier, 915. If you want to read it more in detail yourself. Okay. It's worthwhile reading because it's relevant to this subject. But let me continue. Okay. So the Bechina Silik Hu Shenishar B'Koyach V'lei B'Poyel. So again, just as the Eir HaGvul, the finite energy of the divine to create existence is only potential state before the Tzimtzum. And what is B'Poyel? What's in actuality? The infinite? The same, but Tzimtzum reverses it. The Eir HaGvul and the Koyach HaGvul become actual, and the Eir HaBligvul or the Eir HaSevav remains in a more potential state, like in a receded state. Like in the example of the teacher, his infinite brilliance is right now concealed for all practical purposes. Or more importantly, it's not functioning. Now within him, if it's functioning, obviously, in his mind, it's there, but it's like all the millions of ideas our brain has, even when you're not thinking of them. So when you say, for example, you have many ideas in your mind, it's only the idea that you're actually thinking about right now or expressing right now in speech that we call B'Poyel. What do you do with all the other ideas? Of course, they're there in the brain, but we call them in a state of potential. Why potential? Because they're not active right now. They're like, it's like the hard drive has all this memory in it. Fine. But then when you access a piece of that memory, that's when it becomes B'poil. So that's how he explains what the Tzimtzum does to the Eira Seviv. Okay. V'nizbar Sham, and it was explained there again, the Maimer of Vayikra that I just, 9:15, page 9:15. The Inyan Shenishar, hu al derech Inyan haYechelis. That which remains, which means that which remains even after the Tzimtzum, because as I said, the Tzimtzum does not shut off the Eira Seviv. Doesn't like extinguish it, God forbid. It turns it into a state that's more potential. He says it's like Yechelis. Yechelis means capacity, which is a very powerful word that the Alter Rebbe innovated actually. Tzemach Tzedek brings it. When you say the Yechelis ha'atzmos, God's capacity to do something, doesn't mean he's doing it, it just means capacity, but it's even a higher level than actually doing something, because it shows on his capacity to do it. So now he says Ye'uin Sham. Okay, so that changes things. He says, look there. Ye'uin means delve into it there. That means he wants this. The Rebbe says in a Sikha that when the Rebbe says Ayin Sham or Ye'uin Sham, it's a command that the Rebbe is telling us we must look at that place. So here, often this is not so common. When the Rebbe Rashab cites previous discourses, he doesn't usually say, go look there. He just tells us where it is. It's always helpful to look, obviously. But here he's telling us explicitly to look. So I think we need to fulfill his wish or command, if you wish. So maybe we should learn it inside. It'll just make it a little easier to understand. Because the next piece is all going to be about what kind of impact does the Tzimtzum have on the Eir HaBligvul and the Eir HaSeviv. And that is, as he's going to elaborate more before he gets back. Well, there's going to be a few more lines. So,
Yun Sham referring to the Maimer Vayikra.
yeah. And page 915 would be more the specific place. Just, you know what? We'll do this in an abbreviated way. I will be my Ayin, and you'll make me your shliach. Okay? So that way you're doing this. But you could also look into it. But I'll look right now very quickly. Because
that could be preemptive.
Over Yontif, fine. But since this will be the class before Yontif, let me look at it because I'd like to finish at least to the bottom of the page, so we have a full Inyan here. So give me one moment. I'm just going to quickly review it.
Great idea. Good.
That's a good idea, Rabbi Weingarten. We should study this other Maimer during Chol HaMoed if you're interested.
Yeah. Let me just quickly look 1 second. Okay. Yeah, worth learning. It's quite a subject. I could see now why the Rebbe Rashab said we should look there. I don't want to go over the whole thing.
There's another you and Sham there.
What?
There's another you and Sham there.
Yeah, to the Yo, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so it's a treasure hunt here. You go from one to the next, right? Yeah, he says a pasuk Yo, you and Sham there, the bottom, correct. Okay, it's a very fascinating piece and very relevant, to be honest. So let me just sum it up as much as I can. I think I have to begin with the end in mind to make this easier to understand where we're going with all of this. Let's just go back to the bigger picture of this discussion. The bigger picture of this whole discussion is the following. God desired to have a dira b'tachtenim. He wants a home for the divine in this lowest of worlds. Now we have a paradox here, a major paradox. Tachtenim, by definition, means total concealment, as the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 36 of Tanya. That's why it's called Tachtenim. If it said Nisava Kodesh Baruch Hu Liyas Baruch Dira Be'elyonim, that he wants to have a home in the higher spiritual worlds, okay, there the question would be, what does he need it for? There's no achievement. As a matter of fact, the Alter Rebbe says it's actually a Yerida. What does Atzilus have that Atzmus doesn't have? But Tachtenim has some chidush. The chidush is that a place that's completely devoid of godliness, which means completely concealed as much as possible, that is, to the point, look at the world around us. Millions, billions of people doing whatever they want. Even those that claim to have faith in God also don't necessarily live up to it all the time. Why? Because the Eibishter had to create a tremendous tzimtzum and tzimtzumim to create Tachtenim. But here's the paradox. So how does it become a dira? How can you make it into a home? If you said he created the world and we have to behave and just be good people, like a very basic disciplined level, fine. That would be easier to understand because, okay, God created a world where we have free will, the potential to behave in very inappropriate and destructive ways, selfish ways, the option to behave in a noble way, and we're asked to behave in a noble way. Be a righteous person, don't be a wicked person, a cruel person. But it says that lo yizbarach, that he should have a home here. In other words, Elokus in its full glory to the highest levels should feel comfortable here. That changes the whole equation. That's not just enough for us to be well behaved or just to listen to God's laws, or as I explained a number of times, just to be like servants that serve God. That's one step. But God wants to be a dira lo yizbarach, that he should be fully present here. And we should have a relationship with him, not just fulfill his laws and his orders, but we should understand him. V'yadaita Ayin, we should know him. V'ashavesa levavecha, we should feel him. Internalize, we should understand. Da'asa l'kei avicha, v'haftas Hashem elekecha. Full Torah is filled with expressions and mitzvahs that talk about a relationship, not just actions. So here we have this major dilemma, which of course is the whole theme of why we need an interface. But the interface, to be complete, has to represent both sides of the coin, both sides of the relationship. The nivra and the beira, which is why the yesh amiti and the yesh nivra in the language that we've been learning earlier in Ayin Beis here. The creator, the true reality, and the created reality. Two ends of the spectrum, antithetical in every possible way. So we have the Ayin be'emtza, we have the channel in between, essentially oir, and everything that it brings, the whole Seder Shtalshlus, which is stepping stones between this highest to not just connect them, but they become completely integrated. That adira lo yizbarach b'tachtenim, bringing it all merging it all together, fusing it, which is, of course, the Geula. Mashiach comes, you'll have it both. But we're faced with a big dilemma. Divine consciousness, Atzmus is not an issue. Atzmus can do whatever he wants. We said Atzmus is Mushlil, is Shlilas HaKel. He's not defined by Bligvul, he's not defined by Gvul. He's not defined by Bligvul, by Gvul, by Chiyuv, or by Shlila. He's not defined. But we are defined. Tachtenim is defined, are defined. So we need something that will work. So God created a whole system, starting before the Tzimtzum, with his divine consciousness, divine Mitzias Nimtza, not built to Mitzias Nimtza. Built to Mitzias Nimtza is only in God's domain. He gives us a taste of it. So he created a whole series of steps which first reflect divine infinity. Why do you need that? As I explained a number of times, because we want an expression of the divine. We don't just want it on our terms. We don't just want the Ayin, the divine energy that relates to us. We also want the divine energy that teaches us about the source and reveals to us the source. And that's done more by Eira Bligvul, Eira Seviv. On the other hand, we need an Eir that relates to us. And then we need to bring them together. So the big operative question of the last few hundred pages has been, how can we, in a post-Tzimtzum reality, where the Eir HaBligvul had to be concealed, how can we experience it? It seems like a total paradox. How could you do you need it to remove, so to speak, or conceal that infinite light, or else we would not be able to, there'd be no space for us, for an independent consciousness. Now, if we didn't have to connect to that Eir HaBligvul, that question would not be that strong, or wouldn't exist altogether. Because we could answer, our goal is to connect only to the finite energy, to the artist as he relates to his art. Who says we need a connection, a relationship with the artist beyond the art, or beyond being artist altogether and all that infinity that he has? But again, then it's not a full relationship. Then it's more in our terms, and the God side is going to be somewhat, God will be removed from us in that sense. And that's not what Chassidus wants to accomplish. We want it full, a direlei yisbarach b'tachteinim, in a way that we could understand it. So now we have to deal with the dilemma of this Eir HaBligvul. The Eir HaGvul, relatively speaking, it's still a dilemma, but there, at least you have a head start, because God himself manifested his energy in a finite way, which will be 10 hidden spheres. Yes, before the Tzimtzum, they're still all part of an infinite consciousness, but you have the seed, the beginnings. It's still only in a potential state, as I just mentioned earlier. Then comes a Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum guides that energy, the root of the finite energy, through the root of the power of finite, the Rishimu. The Eir and the Kalim ultimately join together, and you have existence. And you have also a process to reverse the process and retrace the steps, and we can connect with the Eir HaGvul, with the Kav, and with the root of the Kav even. But the Eir HaBligvul, what's the story with the Eir HaBligvul? What happens with that? That had to be completely concealed, because any of it would not allow us to exist, because it's infinity. Infinity doesn't allow room for the finite. Like I said before, when your mind is flowing in an infinite way, you can't even express words and letters. So on one hand, it has to be completely concealed. But on the other hand, can we really say that the power of God, of the infinite, disappears? God forbid. That's why he says in that Maimon in Vayikra, he says, he's dissecting it in every detail, that it goes into a state of potential, what he calls Yechelis, as if it's not there. But he keeps saying it's there, but it's not there, because it's not active. So God, in his infinite capacity, this is the ultimate paradox. Infinite energy, which by definition means it's infinite and goes everywhere, in some way, God limited it to not be active in our consciousness. But it's there behind the scenes ultimately for us to be able to access it. That's the gist of what he's saying there. A little more detail than what I just said, but that's the point. Now, why is it relevant here? Because it's very relevant here. Because if we're going to talk about the white flame, and the darkened flame. The darkened flame, we understand, it's the flame that's going through concealment, and it shines through the concealments, and fine. Eris and Kalim, ultimately. Shama beguf, a soul and a body. But once you go to Eira Bligvul, where there's no Kalim, and there's no guiding the Eira Bligvul in any way, because Bligvul is not guided, so what do you do with it? So he's saying here that it's not subject, he's calling it a level that's beyond and higher than the Tzimtzum, which it is. But on the other hand, we said that Tzimtzum affected it. So he's saying the effect that had on it was not in any way limiting the Eira Bligvul, it's just putting it into a state of God's capacity as opposed to something that's active, which is a very different impact than the impact on the Eir HaGvul. The Eir HaGvul continues to be active. Well, I should qualify that. First, there is a complete stop, the Tzimtzum, but then when the Kav comes, it's active. Its activity is now directed and guided. That's why it's a thin ray of transmission. Like the teacher, he has to exercise the Tzimtzum all the time as he's teaching students. The Eir HaBligvul's impact is that just went into a state of potential state. Now there he explains also that Yechelis is not what we usually say, Yechelis ha'atzmus, means really the Kol Yachol, that God has everything capacity. He's saying it's not that either. It's something in between potential and capacity. But that I'd rather talk about later because that is a little more complicated. And I think once you learn it, we can then review it after Pesach. He says those words. He says in the parentheses, we talked about it then. There's recordings of it. But I want to just focus on what's relevant to what we're discussing here. That the bottom line is, so the infinite light, if someone asks you the question, does the Tzimtzum impact it or not? The answer has to be yes or no. It impacts it in the context that it's right now not active from the point of view of the recipient. By God, something not being active is not a chsarn. God doesn't need things to be active. Ein kayach chaser peil, as he brings there as well. On the other hand, so in that sense, there's an impact. On the other hand, there's no impact because the Eir HaBligvul remains completely intact. Nothing. The Tzimtzum is not in any way diminishing it or causing it to flow in a different way. It's like almost when God made the boundary, when he created the boundary between land and water. So the earth was completely covered by water in the beginning of creation. On day 2, God separated the higher and the lower waters, and earth emerged. So now the ocean comes to the beach, to the border, and it doesn't cross over, because that's the rule. Is that a diminishment of the ocean? It's just saying you belong here, you don't belong here. Now, it's true. It sounds ironic that a B'li Gvul is being told not to come into the world where the structure is. But that's the power. So on one hand, it's affected by the Tzimtzum. On the other hand, it's not. And that's why you can call it a white flame, not a darkened flame. Because the flame itself is not darkened. What's only darkened is its impact or its activity, especially in context of the Cholol L'Mokum Pani. But it remains there behind the scenes. And through our Aveda, we will be able to access it. And that's why we can ultimately have an experience even with the Eir HaBligvul. But that's not the theme right here. That will be discussed later, and we discussed it earlier as well. And yes, this is the difference between the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti and the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra in the context of Eir HaSevev and Eir HaMamala. One being Sevev, Ayin Yesh HaMiti, and Mamala, Eir of the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. But one more thing I would add is that the focus really here is the two levels of Ayin in Eir Pnimi. But here, clearly, Eir Sevev is the second interpretation, the second way he explained the Ayin, the two levels of Ayin, where one, like he says, is Gili Ha'atzmus, Shemegala, the word was Gili Ha'atzmus, that's what the Eir HaBligvul does. And you'll say, well, in a second, where's this Gili Ha'atzmus? We don't see it. Fine. But that's its role, and it will ultimately be able to achieve that through our Aveda. We'll be able to reach that level. Okay, I hope that was somewhat explained. Now, should we read it on? Yeah, I might as well read till I'm going to read till. Let me read a few more lines. Now, hine. So we have really a question that's still hanging here. You just said that the Er HaBligvul is higher than Tzimtzum. It says, it's higher than Chesed, but we learned that the Tzimtzum is Stalik ben Salamed. It concealed this light. I should add one more thing. In Vayikra, he also says, he reconciles it with another subject, that usually when we speak about we don't speak about koyach and poil, potential and actual, we speak about revealed or concealed. Like, for example, when your neshama is active, let's say when you're awake and your mind is working and your feelings are all functioning, okay, you can say that's bepoil. Your soul's faculties are functioning. What happens when you go to sleep or when you're not using your faculties? Let's say you're sitting in a chair, you're not using your ability to write. So do we call that Gilead and Helam, a concealed state and a revealed state, or we call potential and actual? He addresses that as well. And he says, even though we can say about Bligvul that it's really only concealed and not revealed, but he says the concealment is as if it's only potential and not actual, which really means that, I don't say it's semantics, but there's a level where you could say Gilead Helam means, for example, I'm either you're writing or you're not writing. But what happens if, God forbid, there's an injury to your hand? So it's more than Gilead Helam. If a person gets injured, it's not just, oh, you know what, I'm about to write or I'm not writing. It's not just a Gilead and Helam. It sometimes can be a point where the potential is there, but it's not actualized because the Keli is not there. So there are ways to distinguish between revealed and concealed and potential and actual. He talks about that there as well. Bottom line, he says it's potential and actual, it's revealed and concealed, and he reconciles it on page 916, but at the same time, it's as if it's not active in any way. So in that sense, it has both elements. I just wanted to add that. So based on this, we have a dilemma. I already answered it somewhat in my explanation, but let's read it inside. What's the issue here? You said that this is Er Nehera. Nehera. Eish Nehera. Eish. What's the lush? I'm sorry. Eish Cheda and Eish Levena. You said it's a white flame. Or Levona. But you know that it's affected by the Tzimtzum. And in Vayikra, the Maimon Vayikra, he said it goes into a state of potential, not actual, like Yechelis. So which one is it? Is it affected or not affected? So he says now, Hine b'mokim acher. Elsewhere, Mavur is explained that by Eagle HaGodel, Noga Bayat Tzimtzum. Okay, the Eagle HaGodel, I've explained, is the makif. Eagle means a circle, a wheel, circle. Once the Tzimtzum happened, what happens to the light that's not in the hole, the chol l'mokum panei? So if you think of it in physical terms, it's like a light, it's like a bagel, a hole in a bagel. The light around is like a surrounding light. Think of it like the eclipse of the sun. So the sun now is darkened. It's a black spot, a black sphere, but around it you can see the rim, you can see light. So he said this, so the way the Kabbalah, Eitz Chaim explains it, that the Tzimtzum created an Eagle HaGodel, because the light that did not enter, that was receded, remains, so to speak, as a circle around it. So there's a question in Chassidus, did the Tzimtzum affect the Eagle HaGodel? You could say it affected that it should not shine inside the space that was left. But was the light itself of the Makif affected? So he says elsewhere, it explains that Eagle HaGodel, Noga Bayat Tzimtzum. It affected the Tzimtzum, impacted it. And what was the impact? It caused the light to remain there and not to extend. So that's an impact. In other words, should you not have imposed any breaks, any limit, that light would not remain outside of the hole. It would have been spread everywhere. Something forced it, the Tzimtzum, that is, the power of Gvul of God, to limit and not let that, the Eagle HaGodel, that Makif, to shine inside the Cholol. In other words, in not in physical terms, conceptual terms, that the space of the student is that the light, the infinite light of the teacher is not affecting the space of the student, so he can listen, absorb, and grow. So Nagaba at Tzimtzum. V'ayim mashakosa be'emek hamelach shar aleph perek nun gimel. Below he says it's perek nun zayin. Emek hamelach is from is a makubal, a great makubal. His name was Bachrach. Yitzchak, not Yitzchak. His last name was Bachrach. He was a student from the Talmidim of Rabbi Yisrael Sarug. The Arizal had many students. The main school of thought of the Arizal goes by Rab Chaim Vital. But he had another student, Rabbi Yisrael Sarug, who went off to Europe and had his students. And there's certain differences between the Kabbalah of the Rab Chaim Vital and Rabbi Yisrael Sarug. I once discussed it at length. But Chassidus actually brings from both. There were those Mekubalim that actually would not look into any Kabbalah that was not from Rab Chaim Vital. But Chassidus and Alter Rebbe and the Rabbeim, they bring from both. Emek HaMelech is one from the Yisrael Sarug. So he says, B'inyan HaGimel Gvuris, but the Gimel Gvuris. Okay, he doesn't bring the details, but if I recall correctly, what it says there is that that there are three different stages of how the Gvura of Tzimtzum impacts the light. I'm going to have to look it up to be more accurate. This is one of the reasons I didn't want to elaborate more on page 1192. Remember, we still have a debt. I still have a debt to explain that the difference between the Simla, the Salma, Eiter Erke Salma of and of Tzimtzum, because I think it's connected to the Emek HaMelech, because he talks, there's a thing called the Tzimtzum of the Malbus, the Tzimtzum of the garment. But I don't want to go into it right now. It's going to be a little too complicated. It needs a lot more elaboration. Well, Lefiza Nira, I'm just going to read till the second line of the next page. Third line. So we have this subject covered. I'll go a little longer here. Well, Lefiza Nira, and according to this, that the Tzimtzum did impact the Igul HaGadol, the Sham Meira Er K'moishe Yekoidim. According to this, it appears that there's like a dual impact here. On one hand, the Eir, as it is in the Igul, not in the Cholol, was not impacted. There, the light radiates. There was no change in the light that remains around the space, that receded. Like there's no change in the ocean that's not covering the earth right now, land. The ocean remains ocean. It's not in any way diminished. It's just not crossing its boundary. So what did it change? The Tzimtzum is that it shouldn't extend into the space of the Cholol. So in other words, the brilliance of the teacher in his mind, his infinite brilliance, remains intact, exactly as it was before the Tzimtzum. The difference is that it's not impacting this space where the student is allowed to enter to be able to receive. So there you have the two sides to it. And that removal or that concealment is only in contrast to the space of the whole, meaning the space where the Tzimtzum took place. The Ki'ilu Einei, like we said from in Vayikra, as if it's not there. Why do we say Ki'ilu? Because we know it's there, but it's not there in any way that impacts the student or the creation. But the Rebbe Rashab says, okay, so that's one way to explain it. But also, according to what we said earlier, and what did he say earlier? That it doesn't have any impact. That the Tzimtzum had no impact on the Eir HaSeviv. Harizeu ili ba'ir. I'm not sure. One second. I'm not sure what the Fimashin is Bar Le'il is. Let me just read it and I'll tell you in a moment. But also based on what we said earlier, either he means that the Tzimtzum had no impact, or he means the Maimer of Vayikra, Harizeu ili ba'ir mashenishir b'koyach. Okay, so based on this first explanation, it seems like there is a chsaron. What's the chsaron? The flaw, the missing part is that the infinite light, the Eir HaSeviv, cannot shine now, is not shining now in the place of existence. So it's as if it's not there. But according to what we learned earlier, which I think he means Vayikra now, it actually is seen as a quality. That's Kashamera Eir, it says, Harizeu Iliba Eir. This is actually a quality, an advantage in the energy, in the light. Mashanishar B'Keach, that it's only in a state of potential. Dahainu B'chinas Yechelis Levad. In other words, nothing changed from the point of view of God. The fact that he has the capacity to give off such light, and the orb of the actual light is actually shining, it doesn't weaken it because it's not shining, because on the contrary, it's going back to that superior state, how it is in its source. There's nothing weaker about it. It's the way God has the capacity. Right now, he's choosing that capacity should not have actual function. So it's not even seen as a weakness. It's actually a quality. So then, therefore, when the light does radiate, in whatever state, whether it's after the Tzimtzum or, after this, in any state where you do see it radiating, meaning as it is before the Tzimtzum, it's a mamash agili without any concealment at all. Because in general, the energy that's pre-Tzimtzum, which is the infinite light, its revelation is one that does not come through the concealment of the Tzimtzum. And therefore, how much more so, when this energy is in a higher state of potential after the Tzimtzum, its revelation is in a form that's not concealed at all. And that's why it's called a white flame, because it's completely white, pure, without any shred, any speck, any impact of tzimtzum on it. And that's Shiur, the level of Eish Levana, the white fire flame. That's Gili Ein Sof HaBligvul. From here on, he's going to come and talk about how Malchus is yearning for this revelation. That's completely unfiltered, unaffected by the Tzimtzum. Now, this last few lines is not so simple, I know. I'll just say this. I don't want to leave everybody in a quandary, so I'll just say the following. Because it's confusing. Is he talking about, is it revealed? Is it not revealed? What's going on exactly, right? So my initial reading, and I will read it over myself for quite a few times before I really say anything definitive, but my initial reading is that there are two explanations of how we deal with the Eir HaBligvul, what the Tzimtzum's impact on it is. Now, according to all ways you explain it, the impact is not on the Eir itself. The question is, what kind of impact does it have on the impact of the Eir HaBligvul? In other words, according to where it says that Nogabayat Tzimtzum, that the Tzimtzum did affect it, the Igul HaGadol, the point is the effect is not on its very being, because the Eir continues to shine exactly as it was. It's just not allowed to shine into the black hole, into the space. That's the effect. But there is an effect. That's why it's called Nogabayat Tzimtzum, because its effect is that the Bligvul is not impacting in any functional way. According to what it says in the Maimer of Vayikra, that the Tzimtzum does not in any way impact. Why? Because the fact that the Eir cannot enter the Cholol is not necessarily a weakness. It's just what God wants. And what happens with that Eir HaBligvul? It's not saying, oh, you're now not invited to the party. You're not part of this. No, you are part of now my infinite potential. The koyach, or the yechelis, even better, the word yechelis. So in no way have you been diminished, and on the contrary, because you are now connected to my infinite potential, more than just infinite expression. Therefore, when you are revealed, the Tzimtzum never affects you. You completely are not impacted by the Tzimtzum. So in other words, there's two stages of the Eir HaBligvul. One is before the Tzimtzum, where it's in a state that it dominates and is completely functional in divine consciousness. Then comes the Tzimtzum. And what it does is it says, no, you have to now recede and allow for another consciousness to emerge called existence, the Tzimtzum, the Rishimu, the Kalim, and everything that comes with that. So that's two states for this Eir HaBligvul. In the second state, you could say the Eir HaBligvul is impacted because it's not present in a functional way, or you could say the Eir HaBligvul is just basically just in its natural place in the God's Yechelis, potential and capacity. And as such, the Tzimtzum really is not impacting it at all. The Tzimtzum is just saying, I need to create existence right now. And you remain in your full connection to God and God's consciousness. The fact that it doesn't impact reality, our existence at this point, that's the way it's meant to be. For existence to emerge, we need to have that. So bottom line, either way, you explain it, whether the impact is an impact that it doesn't shine into the chol, or the whole thing is not even an impact because the Eir HaBligvul just is really in its natural place. Bottom line is, it's called Eish Levana, because the Tzimtzum does not affect it in that direct way. This question, the two ways, is simply, is the fact that we don't see that effect of the Eir HaBligvul relevant to that Eir HaBligvul, or is it not relevant? That's how I would explain the two ways here. But remember, through Avodah, we will be able to draw it down. So we will be able to have an experience that's pre-Tzimtzum experience, even after the Tzimtzum, but only once we understand what this Eir HaBligvul really is like. There's a lot more to say on this. I said, I think, initial explanation. I'm going to talk more about this, rest assured. Okay, so now, I will say one more thing that just comes to mind, just for the record. And I'll elaborate on this after Pesach more. Why is it so important that this Eir HaBligvul not be affected by the Tzimtzum, and that we have a white flame or white fire? Is because we want to have an unadulterated taste of Gilui Elokus that's not impacted in any way by creation. But at the same time, we want it in a way that we can contain it, which of course is back to the paradox that I mentioned. But the reason the Rebbe Rashab is so insistent on making sure this Eir HaBligvul remains so pure and white, actually, white light, white flame, white fire, because he wants us to ultimately be able to have something that is purely godliness in our consciousness. We're not there yet till we do the Avodah. But now you know that there's a Neir that the Tzimtzum will never affect. And any effect that it does have is only because we cannot contain it, or we cannot see it or feel it. Because if we did, we would be annihilated. We'd be overwhelmed, as he explains also in the Maimer Vayikra, by the way. So I think that's vital to understand. So therefore, the Tzimtzum, in other words, what the Tzimtzum did was it has two impacts. One is it made it, in a way, like stored away the Eir HaBligvul for the time that it will be needed in a very pure way. It didn't in any way diminish it. At the same time, that the Tzimtzum had, and the same time, the Tzimtzum also has an impact on the Eir HaGvul, where there's absolutely the dark flame or fire, because that is meant to be affected by the Tzimtzum in a very real way, that the energy flows through letters and containers. Whereas the Eir HaBligvul is not meant to do that. Eir HaBligvul is meant to give us a pure taste of the divine that's not impacted in any way by Tzimtzum. And any impact that, yes, that we've discussed is an impact only from our point of view and only from the fact that it doesn't radiate within existence. But that also is an impact. I'll tell you why. Because then you say, well, so why do we say noga ba'at tzimtzum? So then say lo noga ba'at tzimtzum. Because noga ba'at tzimtzum, because the era blikvul, at the end of the day, it wants to reflect ein ed milvade, that God is everywhere. And the fact that it cannot shine in a conscious and functional way in the space of the tzimtzum, you can say is ultimately some limit. Until through our Veda, Mashiach comes when that changes. But on the other hand, like he said, there's no limit because it's divine capacity. That means Atzmus is not affected by the fact that we can't feel him. But Oyer, on the other hand, is all about consciousness. So that's why you can say Nogabai. Anyway, I wanted to just add that. We're going to stop here, top of page 1195. We'll go over it plenty more. It would be great if everybody learned as much as you can on the topic. But if anybody has any questions, feel free. Or is this already too over everybody's head? Can't even.
I have a question.
Yeah,
I have a question. Well, I'm just wondering if it's really that much of a paradox. I mean, I understood everything you said, but I'm trying to come to clarify even more. When he talks about, he says that this or levana, he says, and the issue of whether the tzimtzum affected it or not, he says about 10 lines up on the prior page, he uses reflexive language. So it's reflexive, meaning the or itself removes itself or it conceals itself. It's not the tzimtzum effect. It's not active. It's not transitive verbiage. It's the or itself is nistalek v'nisalam. So in this sense,
what line did you read now? What line are you reading?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 lines up from the bottom. It's a sentence that begins.
Yeah, I know the sense. Yeah. So what's your point?
My point is on the issue of whether the tzimtzum affected this or levana or this or blikvul. I understand the criticality of the question, but I'm saying it's not necessarily as paradoxical as it may seem, in the sense that
why not? He said clearly that it says elsewhere that the tzimtzum noga, that the tzimtzum impacted it.
Right. Well, I'm getting to that. So you might say, well, you come up with this koach or the yicholas or, and you might say what the tzimtzum affected was essentially bringing that or into its potential state, meaning to say before the tzimtzum, it was only in an active state. It was everywhere. It is, but when you have a tzimtzum, what's new? What's new is this yicholas, this potentiality, this capacity, that it can hold itself back, and that we have to reach up to it with our avoida. That's what's new. So the tzimtzum affected Mitzias, if you will, in the larger sense, by creating, if you will, I want to say creating. The tzimtzum doesn't create, God creates, but the impact is that what's new is this potentiality, this yicholas.
I'm not sure what you mean by new, this yicholas. That I don't know the word new. I'm not sure where you get the word new. So that doesn't speak to me. I'm not sure what you're adding to what I said, to be honest.
I'm not adding. I'm trying to clarify and reconcile and synthesize what you said.
Reconcile between what and what?
Between noiga and low noiga, between impacted, that the tzimtzum impacted it or didn't impact it. And yes, I understand you can look at it from the two perspectives, and maybe it is a paradox if you look in the pshat, the literal sense. I don't mean to say that the potentiality.
What you're saying fits into the words of the Rebbe Rashab, but you're just coming up with your own ideas right now.
I just used his language. I'm not using my own ideas.
I just read the mimer where he spoke two different approaches. I'm not sure what your comment is. What are you adding here?
I'm trying to use his language to reconcile
Reconcile
the two ways
what?
he's.
Whether the impact on the Bli Gvul, he
don't know.
reconciled it himself.
I'll let it go. I think it's very clear what I said. I don't want to argue before Yontif. It's very clear what I said.
Okay, well, I'm not to me.
Well, I'm sorry. I referred to the language that's reflexive language. The light itself is holding itself, or God, it's holding itself back. The Tzimtzum's not affecting it. So what's new? What's new in the sense of impact? Impact means something happened.
Where do you get the word new? He doesn't even use the word new anywhere.
I'm not saying new. I'm saying what's the impact? An impact is a difference, a change. I don't want to. I'm trying.
Two ways. So the Rebbe Rashab
Right.
explained that in 2 ways, which is what I just learned. So what are you adding to the 2 ways that he said?
Well, first of all, it's not my job to add. I'm trying to clarify. Every time I add, you get upset. When I try to clarify, use his language, you say I'm not adding anything new.
The word upset is not in our dictionary here. It's a discussion.
Well, it is.
Not upset.
So let's let it go. I asked the question and
I
it's okay.
didn't understand. That's all I'm saying. I don't understand what you're saying. That's
I
all.
used his language. Let's just, I'll let it go.
Okay.
This is B or an Ayin. It's not a vikuach.
It's not a court because I'm not even sure what you're saying or asking. That's what I'm saying. I'm not clear what you're saying. That's all I'm saying. Okay. Anybody else want to comment or ask anything?
Yashikayach is a wonderful, everybody should have a kosher and Freilich and Pesach, and Yashikayach we really learned a lot from this stuff as well.
Okay, everyone have a very good Pesach as well. So we'll resume the class will be on April 6th, I think, on Tuesday, I said. So we stop here at the top of 1195. And by all means, I would suggest everybody review and learn, and we can then go back to it and dig deeper, because there's plenty to be said on the topic.